In 2003, a 19-year-old named Jordan was trying to find steady work after graduating high school. Jobs were difficult to find at the time, so he accepted whatever he could get. When a restoration company hired him to clean fire and water damage, he felt relieved. The job paid $10 an hour and offered full-time work, which was enough to keep him afloat while he figured out what to do next. Jordan's first assignment seemed unpleasant, but manageable. A basement had flooded with sewage after a pipe burst. He spent several days hauling soaked carpet out of the house, spraying disinfectant on the walls and floors, and dragging ruined furniture to a dumpster outside. The work was exhausting and filthy, but when the job was finished, he felt a sense of accomplishment. It was steady income, and that alone made the job feel worth it. The following morning, the company owner called Jordan into his office. Jordan expected feedback about the flood cleanup, or maybe instructions for another similar job. Instead, the boss told him he was putting together a special crew. The company had begun receiving requests for jobs that were more complicated than water damage. Jordan would be supervising 3 newly hired workers and driving a company van filled with specialized equipment. The decision didn't make much sense. Jordan had only been working there for 3 days. Still, the boss handed him the van keys, along with a list of phone numbers for the 3 new employees. Inside the van were hazmat suits, respirators, chemical cleaners, industrial tools, and large red biohazard bags. The boss briefly explained which cleaning products were used for disinfecting and where everything was stored. He was vague about what the jobs actually involved. He only said every situation would be different, and that Jordan would receive instructions each time they were sent somewhere. The position had a name: C.S.C. Crew Leader. Jordan quickly realized it meant crime scene cleanup. The boss assured him of one important detail. The coroner would always remove any bodies before Jordan and his crew arrived. Their responsibility was simply to clean whatever remained afterward and determine which items could be salvaged and which had to be removed as hazardous waste. Jordan accepted the role, assuming the company saw something in his work ethic. The first assignment came that same morning. An elderly person had died alone inside their home and had not been discovered for several days. When Jordan and his crew arrived, the county coroner met them at the front door. He asked Jordan to come inside so he could point out the contaminated areas that would need to be cleaned or removed. The body was still in the house. It was slumped forward in a recliner in the living room. The summer heat had accelerated decomposition, and even through respirators, the smell of rot filled the house. 2 of Jordan's crew members, Mark and Tyler, stepped outside almost immediately and vomited in the yard. The coroner apologized and explained they were short-staffed. A transport team was on the way, but they had not arrived yet. While they waited, he walked Jordan through the house and showed him the areas that would need special attention. Fluids had soaked through the chair cushions, into the carpet, and through the wooden subfloor. Some of it had even dripped through the floor into the basement, where it had soaked into several cardboard boxes stored underneath. When the transport team finally arrived and removed the body, Jordan and his crew began working. Jordan started by dismantling the recliner. He removed the back of the chair and sealed it inside one of the large hazmat bags. Carrying the bag toward the front door, he set it down beside the growing pile of contaminated material. When he returned to the living room a few seconds later, the base of the chair was rocking slightly. Jordan paused and watched it sway. No one else was in the room. The other 3 workers were in the basement moving contaminated boxes. He told himself the motion must have been caused by the uneven floor or by the weight shifting when he removed the bag. Jordan finished dismantling the rest of the chair and sealed the remaining pieces inside another bag. While cutting away the carpet around the stained area, Jordan suddenly felt a cold chill run up his spine. The sensation caught him off guard. The house had no air conditioning, and he was sweating inside a hazmat suit in the middle of June. Feeling cold in that environment made no sense. He ignored it and continued working. The next step required soaking the exposed floorboards with a disinfectant cleaner. Jordan stepped outside and retrieved the bottle from the van. When he came back inside, all 3 of his crew members came running up from the basement. They nearly collided in the stairwell as they rushed toward the door. Mark grabbed Jordan and said someone was down there. They had been sorting through boxes when they heard movement deeper in the basement. Because the house was located in Detroit, they assumed it might be a homeless person or someone who had broken in before the cleanup crew arrived. Jordan walked over to one of the basement windows they had opened earlier for ventilation and listened carefully. He heard nothing. After a few minutes, Jordan and another worker named Chris went downstairs to check. Jordan carried a large flashlight while Chris held a metal fence post they had found outside. The basement was completely quiet. Dust covered the floor and every surface. The only footprints visible were the ones from their protective shoe covers. They searched every corner but found nothing. As the 2 men began climbing back up the stairs, a loud hacking cough echoed somewhere behind them. Both of them froze. They turned and searched again, shining the flashlight across the entire basement. Nothing was there. But in the far corner, a pile of boxes looked recently disturbed. Dust floated in the air like someone had moved through the stack moments earlier. They returned upstairs and called the other 2 workers back inside. From that point on, the job became strange. While sorting through the contaminated boxes, Mark swore someone brushed against his shoulder. Tyler said it felt like fingers touched the back of his arm while he carried a box. Chris claimed something tugged lightly at his shirt as he walked past the basement stairs. Jordan tried to keep everyone focused on the work. He returned to the living room to finish the floorboards. But when he reached the area where he had placed the disinfectant cleaner, the bottle was gone. He checked the floor, the doorway, and the nearby trash bags. Nothing. Frustrated, Jordan started carrying the sealed waste bags to the front door. While stacking them near the entrance, he finally saw the bottle. It was lying on its side behind the pile. The problem was that 6 large bags were sitting in front of it. The gallon jug should not have been able to roll into that position without someone moving everything out of the way. Jordan stared at it for a moment. Then he heard something that sounded like a whisper. The voice was too faint to understand. A cold shiver ran down his back again. The crew finished the job and left the house. That night, every member of the crew had a dream. In each dream, an elderly man appeared inside the house. Jordan's dream placed him back in the living room. The old man stood near the recliner, crying. He begged Jordan to stop destroying his belongings. When Jordan continued working, the man tried pushing him toward the door, but Jordan could not stop himself. It felt like he was moving without control. The old man eventually picked up the bottle of cleaner and threw it into the trash pile near the front door, exactly where Jordan had found it earlier that day. The next morning, Mark and Tyler described their own dreams. Both said the same elderly man had grabbed their arms as they sorted through boxes. Both said the man had been coughing violently and begging them to leave his house. Neither of them had been in the basement when Jordan and Chris heard the coughing the day before. Chris said he barely remembered his dream. He only remembered waking up feeling incredibly guilty, like he had done something wrong. After talking it over, the 4 men decided the dreams were probably a stress reaction. Cleaning up death scenes was a shock for anyone, especially a group of teenagers barely out of high school. For the next 2 weeks, the jobs were routine. Then the crew was sent to another house. This time, the death had been a suicide, and the moment Jordan stepped into the basement, he felt something was wrong. The house belonged to a middle-aged man who had taken his own life in the basement. By the time Jordan and his crew arrived, the coroner had already removed the body, but the room was still covered in evidence of what had happened. Blood and biological material were splattered across the walls and furniture. Pieces of bone were lodged in the drywall. The smell of decay filled the basement. Jordan and one of his crew members, Chris, started working immediately. The first step involved using a backpack vacuum designed to remove biological debris from surfaces before deeper cleaning began. Jordan climbed a ladder and started vacuuming the upper portion of one wall, while Chris scrubbed another section nearby. Before leaving, the coroner had mentioned something strange. He said both he and his partner had felt extremely uneasy in the house, especially in the basement. Jordan tried not to think about it, but as the two men worked, an intense pressure began to build in the room. It felt like the air was closing in around them. Then the lights went out. The basement dropped into total darkness. Jordan immediately noticed something strange. His vacuum was still running. If the electricity had failed, the vacuum should have stopped as well. Before he could figure it out, Chris started screaming. Jordan shut off the vacuum and climbed down from the ladder. Furniture scraped across the floor nearby as Chris stumbled into something in the darkness. Jordan reached for the flashlight attached to his tool belt. While searching for it, he saw movement. A shape was approaching him. It was darker than the surrounding darkness, like a solid figure moving through the room. Jordan finally grabbed the flashlight and switched it on. The beam landed directly on the shape. For a moment, he saw the outline of a man. The figure wore a flannel shirt and had a thick beard. His expression looked furious, like he was about to attack. Then the shape vanished. Behind where the figure had been standing, Chris was sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth with his hands covering his head. Chris grabbed his own flashlight and ran upstairs without saying a word. Outside, he bent over and vomited in the yard. Jordan followed and asked what had happened. Chris said he had been scrubbing the wall when something tugged at the tools hanging from his belt. At first, he assumed Jordan was behind him. When he turned around, the lights went out. Then something surrounded him. He described it as thick black smoke that wrapped around his body. He couldn't breathe and struggled to move. When he tried pulling out his flashlight, something knocked it out of his hand. Chris said he thought he was screaming loudly, but couldn't hear his own voice. At the same time, objects began falling from a nearby entertainment center and landing around him on the floor. Eventually, the pressure lifted and the black smoke moved away. Jordan never told Chris about the figure he had seen. They took an early lunch break outside. Chris sat quietly, pale and shaken. When they returned to the basement, the lights were back on. Jordan immediately noticed something strange. Half of the decorations that had fallen earlier were sitting neatly back on the entertainment center. The television was on. A baseball game played quietly on the screen, and the room smelled different. The scent reminded Jordan of burnt hair. Chris lasted about 30 minutes before feeling sick again. He left for the day, leaving Jordan alone to finish the job. While scrubbing the floor, Jordan repeatedly noticed movement in the corner of his vision. Each time he turned to look, nothing was there, but the smell of burnt hair kept returning. Several times, he felt something tug lightly at the tools hanging from his belt. When the cleanup was finished, Jordan went upstairs to use the bathroom. As he walked down the hallway, he heard soft crying. The sound was muffled, like someone trying to hide it. Jordan stopped and listened. The hallway was empty. While standing there, he noticed several framed photographs hanging on the wall. Each one showed the same man, a bearded man wearing a flannel shirt, the same man Jordan had seen in the basement. Jordan had never been upstairs before that moment. After securing the house and turning off the lights, Jordan stepped outside. Just before leaving, he glanced back at the front window. Behind the curtain, he saw the same dark shape again, standing there, watching him. The last experience Jordan would later describe happened in July, inside a small house in a rough neighborhood in Detroit. A man living there had been accused of trying to abduct a child. A crowd formed outside and attacked him before he managed to escape back into his house. Police later determined it was a misunderstanding. The man had actually been helping an injured girl who had fallen from her bicycle. But by the time the truth was known, the damage had already been done. The man died inside his home from the injuries he received. Jordan and another worker were sent to clean the scene. The moment Jordan stepped inside the house, a powerful wave of emotion hit him. Fear, sadness. The feelings came in waves strong enough to make his legs feel weak. His co-worker arrived shortly after and experienced the exact same sensation, even though he had not heard the story from the police. While cleaning, both men repeatedly saw small shapes darting around corners. They looked like patches of fog moving quickly through the house. Several times, they heard faint cries. Sometimes it sounded like someone whispering for help. Other times, they heard a voice saying, "Please stop." When angry neighbors returned outside and began shouting toward the house, the activity inside seemed to increase. Jordan heard footsteps running through the house, from the front door, across the living room, into the bathroom, then up the stairs. Several times, he felt the floor vibrate as if someone had sprinted past him. When the job was finally finished and they stepped outside, the oppressive feeling disappeared immediately. Inside the house, Jordan had felt anxious, frightened, and overwhelmed. Outside, the weight lifted completely. He and his co-worker suddenly found themselves joking and laughing like normal teenagers again. Jordan worked that job for nearly 2 years. During that time, he began keeping a journal where he wrote down the strange things he and his crew experienced. The work slowly changed all of them. By the time Jordan finally left the company, the 3 young men who had started the job with him were gone. 2 died by suicide. 1 died from a drug overdose. Jordan still thinks about something strange regarding those deaths. Each one of them made sure no one would have to clean up their bodies afterward, almost as if they understood exactly what that job was like, because they had lived it. On one summer night during a heat wave, a pizza delivery driver named James was working a shift that never seemed to slow down. Orders had been coming in non-stop, one delivery after another, with barely enough time to return to the store before heading back out again. By the time the evening stretched into night, he realized he hadn't even had a chance to stop and use the bathroom. The heat made everything worse. James had been drinking a lot of water throughout the shift just to stay hydrated, and eventually the pressure hit all at once. What had been manageable minutes earlier suddenly became urgent. Fortunately, the next delivery address was close. James pulled up to the house around 9:30 that night. The neighborhood sat near a large university campus, an area he had delivered to many times before. But the moment he parked across the street, something felt off. Every light inside the house was off. There wasn't even the faint glow of a television through the windows. The darkness stood out even more because the streetlight closest to the house wasn't working. The entire block felt unusually quiet. James stayed in his car and checked the address again. Someone had definitely ordered the pizza. Maybe the customer was sitting in the backyard. Maybe they just preferred the house dark. Either way, James didn't want to walk up and knock on a silent house at night without making sure someone was actually inside. The heat inside the car was brutal. His air conditioning barely worked, and the stack of hot pizza boxes beside him only made the air warmer. Opening the door would let what little cool air remained escape, so he called the customer. The phone rang once before someone answered. A voice came through the speaker sounding rushed and out of breath. "Yeah." James kept his voice simple. "Hey, it's your pizza out front, but it doesn't look like anyone's home." The person on the other end replied between breaths, "Yeah, I'm not home." By that point, James was uncomfortable and impatient. Without thinking much about it, he responded bluntly, "Well then, we're going to have to cancel the order. I'm here during the delivery window, and it was supposed to be cash." There was a pause. Then the voice came through again, clearer this time. It belonged to a young woman named Samantha, and she sounded genuinely distressed. "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm literally running home right now. I had my AirPods in, so I could barely hear you. Please don't leave. I just got off work and I'm starving. I don't have a car. 5 minutes tops, okay?" James immediately felt bad. He remembered delivering to that address before, and Samantha had always been polite. He apologized and told her not to rush. After hanging up, James looked around the street again. His original problem still hadn't gone away. Every nearby house had lights on and people inside. The homes were close together, and there were no dark alleys or empty patches of land nearby. Finally, the situation reached the point where he felt he had no choice. The safest option seemed to be the bushes in front of Samantha's house. She wasn't home yet. The streetlight was broken. No one appeared to be outside. James stepped out of the car and hurried toward the row of bushes lining the walkway that led to the front door. The largest cluster sat only a few feet from the entrance. He glanced both directions down the street, then stepped behind the bushes. A moment later, he froze. The sound didn't match what he expected. Instead of hitting leaves or dirt, the stream sounded like it was hitting something solid. James squinted into the darkness, trying to understand what he was aiming at. Then he heard a deep voice from the bushes. What the hell? Before he could react, a man exploded out of the shrubs. The stranger rushed past him, brushing himself off while running. For a moment, James could only stand there in shock as the man disappeared down the street. Somewhere nearby, a car engine roared to life and tires screeched as it sped away. For several seconds, James didn't move. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. The realization slowly began to form. Someone had been hiding in those bushes, and they had been there before he arrived. Still trying to convince himself there had to be a reasonable explanation, James cautiously stepped toward the bushes and turned on his phone's flashlight. The beam of light revealed something sitting on the ground, a worn drawstring bag. He hesitated before pulling it closer and opening it. Inside were three things: a knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. At that moment, the situation became painfully clear. Someone had been waiting there, and they hadn't been waiting for the pizza delivery driver. Adrenaline hit all at once. James dropped the bag and ran back across the street to his car. The moment James reached the driver's seat, he slammed the door and started the engine. Before the door was even fully closed, he pressed the accelerator and sped down the street. He drove several blocks before stopping at a red light. Only then did he realize how badly his hands were shaking. James pulled into the parking lot of a nearby 24-hour drugstore and tried to calm himself down. For the first time since everything happened, he had a moment to think clearly. Two questions immediately came to mind. Should he call the police first, or should he call Samantha? He sat there for a few seconds thinking about it. If Samantha was real and she was still on her way home, she could be walking straight toward the same house where that man had been hiding. That thought made his stomach drop, but another possibility suddenly crossed his mind. What if Samantha wasn't real at all? What if the entire order had been a trap to lure him there? He had heard stories about delivery drivers being targeted for robberies before. After a few moments of hesitation, James decided to call the police first. The 911 operator answered and immediately began asking questions. Trying to explain everything at once, James ended up rambling through the story in a panic. He told them about the man in the bushes, the bag with the knife and duct tape, and the possibility that Samantha might be walking toward the house. At one point, he even blurted out that the suspect should be easy to identify because he had accidentally urinated on him. The operator calmly told him to stay on the line. While he was still speaking with 911, another call appeared on his phone. It was Samantha. He couldn't answer while still connected to emergency services, so he ignored it. A few seconds later, a text message appeared. Samantha said she had arrived at the house and didn't see the delivery driver anywhere. James immediately told the operator. They assured him officers were already on the way, but they asked him to remain where he was. James sat there staring at the message for a moment. Then the guilt hit him. If Samantha had just walked into the same situation he had barely escaped from, he would never forgive himself. Without thinking any further, James put the call on mute and turned his car around. His heart pounded the entire drive back. When he returned to the street, he saw Samantha walking along the curb between parked cars, looking around for the delivery vehicle. James flashed his headlights and waved her over. She approached the driver's window casually, still expecting to pick up the pizza. Before she could say anything, James whispered urgently for her to get into the car. She looked confused for a moment, but when she saw the 911 call still active on his phone screen, she quickly got inside and locked the door. Once the doors were secured, James explained the situation as calmly as he could. There had been someone hiding in the bushes. The police were already on the way. They needed to leave the area immediately. Following instructions from the operator, they drove to a nearby location and waited for responding officers. Police arrived shortly afterward. James gave a statement describing the man he had seen and the items inside the bag. While officers searched the area around the house, Samantha spoke privately with them as well. Later that night, police explained something important. Samantha immediately recognized the description of the man who had been hiding outside her home. It matched someone she knew, an abusive former boyfriend who had been harassing her for months. When she heard that someone had been waiting in the bushes, she knew exactly who it was. James never saw the man again, but even years later, the memory of that night stayed with him because he realized something unsettling. If he hadn't stopped at those bushes for a completely unrelated reason, the man hiding there might have remained unnoticed, and Samantha would have arrived home alone. One day, a 4-year-old girl was visiting her father during a scheduled school holiday. Her parents had separated not long before. After the split, she and her mother moved to another state, while her father stayed where he was. The arrangement between them was simple. During school holidays, the girl would fly back and spend about a week with him before returning home. At 4 years old, the trips felt normal. Her father's life, however, was chaotic. He often surrounded himself with people her mother didn't trust, men who came and went from the house without explanation. As a child, she didn't question any of it. To her, they were simply adults who knew her dad. One afternoon during that visit, she was playing at a nearby park with her cousin. The park was small and quiet, surrounded by residential streets. They had been running around the playground for a while when a car pulled up along the curb. The girl immediately recognized the driver. He was one of her father's friends. The man leaned out the window and called her over. Without hesitation, she ran toward the car. At that age, she had been taught that her father's friends were people she could trust. The man asked her a simple question. Could she show him where her dad lived? She said yes. The passenger door opened and she climbed into the car. Her cousin stayed behind at the park. As the car pulled away, she began giving directions the best she could. In reality, she barely knew the route herself. At 4 years old, the streets blended together. The man followed her instructions for a while. Then slowly, the turns stopped matching what she remembered. At first, she didn't notice. But after a long drive, something felt different. The houses began to change. The streets grew busier. Buildings became taller. They were getting closer to the city. Her father didn't live anywhere near the city. Eventually, the car pulled into the driveway of a house she had never seen before. The man told her to wait in the car. She sat quietly, swinging her legs back and forth, while he disappeared inside. At that age, nothing about the situation seemed frightening yet. After a while, he returned and led her into the house. That was when the feeling changed. Inside the living room were 2 young women lying on a couch. They looked barely awake, slumped against the cushions like they had fallen asleep there. Standing nearby was an older man. He was pacing around the room and speaking quietly to someone, his voice tense. The entire scene felt strange in a way the child couldn't explain. When the man noticed her watching, their eyes met. The look he gave her made her stomach twist. For the first time since getting into the car, the 4-year-old realized she was somewhere she shouldn't be. A woman stepped forward and quickly led her down a hallway into a bedroom. The woman tried to act calm. She brought the girl a sandwich and told her to eat. The bread was stale and the girl wasn't hungry, but she finished it anyway. She didn't want to seem rude. The woman spoke to her for a while, explaining things the child didn't fully understand. Eventually, the woman left the room and closed the door. The little girl sat quietly on the bed. In her mind, there was a simple explanation. Her dad would come get her soon. While waiting for him, she eventually fell asleep. Sometime during the night, the girl wet the bed. No one came to check on her. The following morning, she woke up alone in the room. At first, she sat quietly, assuming someone would come soon. But the hours passed, and no one opened the door. Eventually, she began crying and banging on the door loudly. After a while, the same woman from earlier returned. The woman complained about the smell in the room and scolded the child for wetting the bed. The girl asked where her dad was. The woman told her he would come later that night after work. No one offered to help her change clothes or clean up. The child spent the entire day sitting in the same clothing. From that point on, the days began to blur together. The girl believed she had been there for months. In reality, it was 5 days. She was allowed to shower once. Most of the food she received was simple sandwiches. One time, someone brought her chips covered in gravy. For the most part, she stayed in the bedroom alone. Every night, she expected her father to arrive and take her home. He never did. Eventually, the truth began unfolding somewhere far away. Back in another state, her mother had been trying to contact both the father and her daughter. Days passed without any response. When the scheduled return flight came and went without the child appearing at the airport, panic set in. The mother immediately began driving across the country. After days of searching, she eventually found the father hiding at his girlfriend's house. He was heavily involved with drugs and owed money to several people. Those people had taken the child as collateral. They had told him where she was. He never came to get her. The mother borrowed money from anyone she could and paid the debt herself. Once the money was handed over, someone finally opened the bedroom door where the girl had been staying. Her voice told her someone had come for her. When the girl stepped into the hallway, she saw her mother standing there. Before she even reached her, she recognized her by smell alone. The moment she realized who it was, every ounce of fear disappeared. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Her mother took her home that same day. After that, the girl didn't see her father again for a long time. Years later, she would talk about the experience in therapy and slowly come to terms with what happened. But even now, looking back on those 5 days, one thing still stands out. At 4 years old, she had no idea she had been kidnapped. She simply thought she was waiting for her dad to come get her. Alright guys, that will be it for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss next week's upload. I drop new stories every week, so there's always something coming. I'll see you in the next one.